In this video, I'll be testing this Coleman Skydome 4% tent against some pretty heavy rain. Before the rain test, I checked in on the tent. At the back of the tent, I found that the light blue tent fabric to bathtub flooring seam was not taped and was inverted instead. The mesh seam was not taped or inverted, but it's protected by the vent outside. The vertical seams were also not taped, but were inverted. At the front of the tent, I found that the door seam was not taped but inverted because it has this rain collar thing for additional rain protection. On the side here, this light blue to dark blue fabric seam has been taped, and so has the bottom window seam because they don't have any additional rain protection. As for the rainfly, all the seams were taped. Also, there's bathtub flooring that extends up to about 6.5 inches. My first rain test was using this water hose, and I tried to spread the rainfall evenly across the entire tent. At the front of the tent, although the rainfly here is pretty short, I found the rainfly pole pretty useful in kind of like diverting the rainfall away from the window and towards the two sides of the tent instead. So even after 15 minutes of this heavy rain, my window mesh was completely dry. However, just bear in mind that this test happened in my yard with not a lot of wind. After 15 minutes of this heavy rain, I stopped to check in on the tent. I found that the bottom of the door was pretty wet, so do be careful when opening the door. Inside the tent, I found that the untaped bathtub flooring seam had started leaking with a few smaller droplets of water inside the tent. The bigger droplets were actually from the water on the roof of the tent, which just dripped right into the tent after I opened the door. Because the rainfly at the front of the Skydome tent is a lot shorter, it doesn't offer quite as much rain protection, and a lot of water was flowing over the bottom part of the tent fabric and the flooring seam right here, so there was some leaking. At the other three sides of the tent, the length of the rainfly is a lot longer and covers at least a good 3/4 of the tent body. There was no leaking at all at these other three sides of the tent. The length of the rainfly offers really good rain protection, and notice that the rainfall doesn't touch the tent body as much, which was why there was no leaking, not even from the seam. As for the mesh of the vents, the fabric of the tent body, and the rainfly, they were all dry. I also managed to put this Coleman Skydome tent through about 45 minutes of heavy rain, which looked like this. At the front of the tent with the shortest rainfly, even with a little wind, the window mesh managed to stay pretty dry, which was surprising. The fabric below the window mesh was pretty damp though. After the rain stopped about 45 minutes later, I found quite a big puddle of water at the front of the tent, which was leaking through the untaped bathtub flooring seam again. I also found that the light blue fabric at the front of the tent was slightly damp from having been put through so much rainfall. For the other sides of the Skydome tent though, which had much longer rainflies, I found that the water didn't get into my tent through the mesh, and there was also no leaking through the bathtub flooring seam or any of the fabric. However, I did notice that this corner seam in the flooring was leaking a bit. Overall, while my Coleman Skydome tent didn't leak too badly in super heavy rain, it's also not the best Coleman tent that I have against rain. It's not the worst either, probably about average. If you have this tent and you're expecting heavy rain, do seal the bathtub flooring seam here as well as the corners, because they're the most vulnerable in heavy rain and the most exposed to water. I do wish Coleman made the rainfly in the front of the tent longer though, so the water wouldn't run over the tent fabric and the seam so much. I actually rain tested my Coleman Skydome tent under heavy rain as well, and because the rainfly covers more of the tent, it managed to withstand 30 minutes of heavy rain instead of just 15 minutes of heavy rain like my Skydome. For a full review on this Coleman Skydome 4% tent, check out this video right here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.